In 1934, Aberdeen was shaken by a name that would never be forgotten: Jeannie Donald. At the heart of this chilling story was a young girl, Helen Priestley, and a case that stunned Scotland with its twists and revelations. But before we start, make sure you like and subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. So get ready as we head to Aberdeen to uncover the case of Jeannie Donald and Helen Priestley. April 20th, 1934. A Friday afternoon in Aberdeen, Scotland. Helen Priestley, 8 years old, left her family's first-floor flat at number 61 Urquhart Road. Her mother, Agnes, had sent her to the cooperative store to buy a loaf of bread. Helen walked down the stairs of the tenement building and out into the street. She never came back. The hours passed. Agnes grew worried. Where was Helen? The shop was close by. The errand should have taken minutes. By evening, the worry turned to panic. Helen's father, John, a painter and decorator, began searching the neighborhood. Friends and neighbors joined in. They called her name through the streets of Aberdeen. They knocked on doors. They checked shops and lanes. But there was no sign of her. Police were called. They launched one of the biggest searches in Aberdeen's history. Officers combed the area around Urquhart Road. They questioned shopkeepers, residents, anyone who might have seen an 8-year-old girl with fair hair on Friday afternoon. The cooperative store confirmed Helen had been there. She had bought the bread. A witness saw her leaving the shop with the loaf under her arm. Then she had vanished. The search continued through the night and into Saturday morning. Then, at 5 in the morning on April 21st, a resident of the tenement building made a horrifying discovery. In the common lavatory on the ground floor, hidden in a sack beneath the stairs, was Helen's body. She had been strangled. Her body showed signs of assault. Investigators initially believed she had been sexually attacked, but closer examination would reveal something different. The injuries had been inflicted deliberately to make it appear that way. Someone had killed Helen and tried to make it look like the work of a male predator. Police sealed off number 61 Urquhart Road. The building became a crime scene. 7 families lived in that tenement, sharing the narrow staircases and common areas. One of them knew what had happened to Helen. One of them had killed her. Detectives began interviewing every resident. The investigation quickly focused on the ground floor flat occupied by Alexander and Jeannie Donald and their 8-year-old daughter, also named Jeannie. The Donald family lived directly below the Priestleys, and there had been trouble between them. The two families were not on speaking terms. There had been arguments, harsh words exchanged. Helen and young Jeannie Donald had been friends once, but that friendship had soured. Helen had taken to teasing Jeannie's mother. She called her names. Coconut was one of them. The insults seemed childish, harmless, but they had festered in Jeannie Donald's mind. Neighbors reported that Mrs. Donald had previously slapped Helen for her insolence. The animosity between the families was well known in the building. When police examined the Donald flat, they found suspicious stains. Both Alexander and Jeannie Donald were arrested. Alexander worked as a barber in the city centre. He had a solid alibi for Friday afternoon. Multiple witnesses confirmed his whereabouts. He was released quickly. But Jeannie Donald had no alibi. She had been home alone while her husband worked and her daughter attended school. She had opportunity, and she had motive. The case required expertise beyond what local police could provide. 2 of Scotland's leading forensic scientists were brought in. Professor John Glaister Jr., Regius Professor of Forensic Medicine at Glasgow University, and Sir Sidney Smith, Regius Professor of Forensic Medicine at Edinburgh University. Both men were pioneers in the emerging science of forensic investigation. They would build the case against Jeannie Donald piece by meticulous piece. The blue Hessian sack that had contained Helen's body became crucial evidence. Glaister and Smith examined it with scientific precision. They found human hairs inside the sack. Under microscopic analysis, these hairs matched samples taken from Jeannie Donald. They found fibers from the sack in the Donald flat. The match was exact. They analyzed bacteria found inside the sack. The bacterial growth matched samples taken from the Donald's kitchen. More specifically, it matched the type of bacteria found on floor cloths in their home. The sack had been in that kitchen. Helen's body had been stored there before being moved. Then came an unexpected piece of evidence from within the Donald household itself. Young Jeannie Donald, only 8 years old, told investigators something strange. On the day Helen disappeared, she had noticed the bread in her home was different from the kind her parents usually bought. Her mother and father always purchased a specific brand from a specific shop, but that Friday there was a different loaf in their kitchen. When police checked, they discovered it was the exact type of bread Helen had bought from the cooperative store. The loaf Helen was carrying when she disappeared was in the Donald household. The forensic evidence built an overwhelming case. Coal ash and cinders found in the sack matched those from the Donald's fireplace. Bloodstains in their flat, while initially thought to be unconnected, added to the picture of violence and concealment. Every scientific test pointed to the same conclusion. Helen Priestley had died in the Donald flat. Her body had been hidden there, then moved to the common lavatory in a desperate attempt to disguise what had happened.
The prosecution developed a theory of what occurred that Friday afternoon. Helen had come back from the cooperative store with her bread. On the stairs, she had encountered Jeannie Donald. Words were exchanged. Perhaps Helen said something insulting, called her a name, taunted her as she had done before. Jeannie Donald, already harboring resentment, grabbed the girl by the shoulder close to her neck. The pressure caused Helen to lose consciousness. Unknown to Mrs. Donald, Helen suffered from a medical condition that made her prone to fainting. The woman believed she had killed the child with that single grab. Panicking, Jeannie Donald dragged Helen's unconscious body into her flat. In a calculated attempt to deflect suspicion, she then assaulted the girl with an instrument, possibly a broom handle, trying to simulate sexual assault. This would make it appear that a male attacker, a stranger, had killed Helen. But the assault woke Helen up. The child began screaming. Terrified of being discovered, Jeannie Donald seized Helen by the throat and strangled her. Now she truly was a murderer. The body needed to be hidden. Mrs. Donald concealed it under the sink in her kitchen. She took the loaf of bread Helen had been carrying and kept it in her own home, a fatal mistake. She waited until the early hours of Saturday morning when the building was quiet and her family asleep. Then she stuffed Helen's body into the Hessian sack and carried it to the common lavatory, hiding it beneath the stairs. She returned to her flat and went about her day as if nothing had happened, but the forensic evidence told the truth she tried to conceal. Jeannie Donald was charged with the murder of Helen Priestley. The trial took place in Edinburgh, not in Aberdeen at the High Court. The authorities feared for her safety. The people of Aberdeen were outraged. A child had been murdered by a neighbor over petty insults and childish name-calling. If the trial had been held locally, there were genuine concerns about violence against the accused. The trial opened on Monday, July 16, 1934. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse. The anger was palpable. Police maintained order, while inside the courtroom, 164 witnesses were called to testify. Jeannie Donald pleaded not guilty. The prosecution presented their forensic evidence in detail. Professor Glaister testified about the hair analysis, the fibers, the bacterial growth. He explained how modern science could link the sack to the Donald household with absolute certainty. Sir Sidney Smith corroborated the findings. The evidence was methodical, scientific, devastating. The daughter's testimony about the bread was damning. Neighbors testified about the bad blood between the families, about Mrs. Donald's previous violence toward Helen. The medical evidence showed Helen had not been raped, that the assault had been staged. This was not the work of an unknown male predator. This was someone who knew the building, knew the child, had access and opportunity. The defense had little to work with. Jeannie Donald maintained her innocence, but offered no alternative explanation. She had no alibi. She had no witnesses who could place her anywhere else. Her only argument was surely a woman could not have committed such violence, but the evidence proved otherwise. The jury took just 18 minutes to reach their verdict: guilty. Judge Lord Aitchison sentenced Jeannie Donald to death by hanging. He reportedly wept as he placed the black cap on his head and pronounced the sentence. Condemning a woman to death was not something he did lightly. Jeannie Donald was taken to Craiginch's prison in Aberdeen to await execution. But the sentence was never carried out. On August 3rd, her solicitor lodged an appeal. Public opinion, despite the horror of the crime, was divided on whether a woman should hang. On August 15th, the Secretary of State for Scotland commuted her sentence to life imprisonment. Jeannie Donald would not die on the gallows. She would spend the rest of her life in prison. She served 10 years. During that time, she was described as a model prisoner. She adapted to prison life, followed the rules, gave no trouble. In 1944, her husband Alexander became terminally ill with cancer. Jeannie was granted compassionate leave to care for him in his final days. It was a brief taste of freedom before returning to confinement. She was released from Duke Street Prison in Glasgow in 1944 after serving her sentence. By then, her family had abandoned her. Her husband had died. Her daughter wanted nothing to do with her. Jeannie Donald was given a new identity and moved to England. She lived in obscurity for 32 more years, never speaking publicly about what she had done or why she had done it. She died in 1976 at the age of 81.
Helen Priestley was 8 years old when she died. She had been sent to buy bread and never came home. A simple errand turned into tragedy because a grown woman could not control her anger over childish teasing. The Priestley family was destroyed by grief. They buried their daughter in Allanvale Cemetery in Aberdeen. A marble gravestone was erected, paid for by public subscription. The people of Aberdeen wanted Helen remembered. Over the decades, the grave fell into disrepair. The stone cracked and lay broken on the ground. In 2019, crime historian Bruce Colley discovered the terrible condition of Helen's memorial. He campaigned to have it restored. The gravestone was repaired and returned to its proper place. People began leaving flowers there again. Helen Priestley, forgotten for so long, was remembered once more. The case became a landmark in forensic history. Jeannie Donald was one of the first people in the world to be convicted primarily on forensic evidence. The work of Glaister and Smith demonstrated how scientific analysis could solve crimes that might otherwise have gone unpunished. Hair analysis, fiber matching, bacterial examination. These techniques were cutting edge in 1934. They became standard practice in criminal investigations worldwide. The Aberdeen sack murder, as it became known, also exposed the dangers of letting minor disputes fester into hatred. Two families living in close quarters, sharing staircases and common spaces, arguments over nothing, insults exchanged, a child calling an adult a silly name, and from these petty incidents came murder. It remains one of the worst cases of a neighborly dispute spiraling out of control in British history. Helen Priestley went to buy bread on a Friday afternoon in April. She never came home. Jeannie Donald killed her, tried to hide what she had done, and was caught by the new science of forensics. The case was solved, justice was served, but Helen was still gone. Her parents still grieved, and Aberdeen still remembered the little girl who died because a neighbor could not forgive a childish insult. This is the end. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more videos like this.